The private terminal at Teterboro Airport was quiet that morning. Too quiet. The kind of hush that comes when money talks so loudly. No one dares interrupt. Sunlight glinted off the polished fuselage of a Gulfstream G700, parked near the tarmac, its sleek silver body looking more like a spaceship than an airplane. Inside the terminal, a few well-dressed travelers sipped espresso from porcelain cups, their voices low, their movements measured. Everyone here knew the unspoken rules. Don't stare, don't rush, and above all, don't assume. Then she walked in. She wasn't what anyone expected. No designer sunglasses, no oversized handbag dripping with brand names, no entourage. Just a black woman in her late 30s wearing dark jeans, a soft cotton blouse, and comfortable flats. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and she carried a small backpack slung over one shoulder. Beside her stood her teenage son, tall, quiet, eyes scanning the room with a mix of curiosity and caution. They looked like they'd just come from a weekend errand, not about to board one of the most expensive private jets in the world. A flight attendant in a crisp navy uniform spotted them immediately. Her smile was polite but tight, the kind reserved for people who might be in the wrong place. She stepped forward just as the woman and her son approached the ramp leading to the jet. "Ma'am," the attendant said, voice smooth but firm. "I'm sorry, but this isn't your aircraft." The woman stopped. She didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice, just tilted her head slightly like someone trying to understand a riddle. "Oh?" she said simply. "Actually, it is." The attendant blinked. She glanced toward her colleague near the cockpit door, who gave a subtle shake of the head. "We weren't told about her." The crew had been briefed all morning. A high-profile client from the Middle East was expected, arriving with bodyguards and a full catering request. This woman didn't match any part of that description. "I understand there might be some confusion," the attendant continued, keeping her tone professional. "But this jet is reserved for a private charter. If you're with another flight, I can direct you to the correct terminal." The woman didn't argue. She just reached into her backpack and pulled out a slim leather folio. It wasn't flashy, just worn at the edges like something used often but treated with care. She opened it slowly and handed over a single sheet of paper. The attendant took it, expecting a boarding pass or maybe a misprinted itinerary. Instead, she saw an official document stamped with a corporate seal, bearing the logo of a major aviation trust. At the top, in bold type, Certificate of Beneficial Ownership. Below, a list of assets. And there, clear as day, was the tail number of the very jet they were standing beside, registered under the woman's name. The attendant's breath caught. She read it twice, then looked up, eyes wide. I didn't realize," she stammered. "It's okay," the woman said gently. "These things happen." But it wasn't really okay, not yet. The crew exchanged nervous glances. Someone radioed the operations office. Voices dropped to whispers. The son shifted his weight, arms crossed, jaw tight. He'd seen this before. The double takes, the assumptions, the way people's faces changed when they realized who his mom really was. It never got easier. Minutes passed like hours. The sun climbed higher. A ground handler hovered nearby, unsure whether to load the luggage or wait. Finally, the lead captain emerged from the jet, tablet in hand. He scanned the document, then nodded slowly. "Confirmed," he said into his headset. "It's her aircraft." Relief washed over the crew, but also embarrassment. They'd made a mistake, and not just a small one. They'd questioned the owner of a $2.1 billion asset because she didn't look the part, because she was a black woman traveling alone with her son, dressed like any other parent heading out for the day. The woman didn't gloat, didn't demand an apology. She just turned to her son and said, "Ready?" He nodded, shoulders relaxing just a little. As they walked up the steps into the jet, the flight attendant hurried ahead to open the cabin door. Inside, the interior was breathtaking. Hand-stitched leather seats, ambient lighting, a galley that looked more like a boutique kitchen than an airplane pantry. But the woman barely glanced at it. She'd designed this cabin herself, choosing comfort over show. Every detail had a purpose. She settled into a seat near the window, her son beside her. Outside, the crew moved quickly now, loading bags, double-checking systems, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. The mood had shifted. What had started as a routine pre-flight had turned into a moment none of them would forget. Later, as the engines hummed to life, the lead attendant brought over a tray with hot tea, exactly how the woman liked it, though she'd never said. "We're honored to have you on board," the attendant said softly. The woman smiled. Thank you. But I'm not here for the honor. I'm here because my sister needs help, and this is the fastest way to get it. The attendant paused. Your sister? In Zurich, she said, looking out the window as the jet began to taxi. She's sick, and time matters more than comfort right now. That simple sentence changed everything. This wasn't a luxury trip. It wasn't a display of wealth. It was a race against the clock, driven by love, not status. The crew exchanged glances again, but this time it was with understanding, not suspicion. As the Gulf Stream lifted off the runway, climbing into the bright blue sky, the woman closed her eyes for just a moment. Not in exhaustion, but in quiet resolve. She'd built her life from nothing, starting with late nights coding in a garage, raising her son alone, turning a small idea into a global company that reshaped how goods moved across continents. The jet, the billions, the quiet power, it all came from that same stubborn belief that what you do matters more than how you look doing it. And today, that belief was flying across the Atlantic. Not for business, but for family. Outside, the world shrank beneath them. Inside, a lesson settled over the cabin. One about assumptions, dignity, and the quiet strength of a mother who never needed to prove anything. But did anyway, just by showing up as herself. The jet leveled off at 43,000 feet, cruising smoothly over the eastern seaboard. Inside, the hum of the engines was soft, almost soothing. The cabin crew moved quietly, trying to be helpful without being intrusive. They'd already apologized twice, but the woman hadn't made a big deal out of it. Still, the tension lingered like a faint static in the air. Her son sat across the aisle, earbuds in, but his eyes kept drifting toward his mom. He knew that look on her face, the calm, focused expression she got when she was holding something heavy inside. He'd seen it during parent-teacher conferences when teachers assumed she couldn't afford field trips. He'd seen it at tech conferences where people asked if she was with someone important. And now, here, thousands of feet above the ground, he saw it again. She reached into her backpack again, not for another document, but for a worn notebook. The cover was frayed, pages filled with neat handwriting, sketches, and sticky notes. This was where she'd mapped out her first business idea over a decade ago, scribbling between shifts at a warehouse job and late-night coding sessions after her son fell asleep. Back then, she wasn't thinking about private jets or billion-dollar valuations. She was thinking about how to keep the lights on, how to afford his school supplies, how to build something that wouldn't vanish if a boss decided she wasn't a culture fit. She'd noticed how packages got lost, delayed or misrouted, not because the system was broken, but because it was built without people like her in mind. So she built a better one. A logistics platform powered by smart algorithms that learn from real-world delays, weather, even traffic patterns in neighborhoods most systems ignored. It started small. Just a website, then an app, then contracts with local businesses who trusted her because she showed up, on time with solutions, no fluff. Investors came later, skeptical at first. You don't look like a founder, one had said during a pitch meeting. She didn't argue. She just showed them the numbers. Within 5 years, her company was moving millions of packages a day across 3 continents. The jet they were on, it wasn't bought for glamour. It was bought because time became her most precious resource, and sometimes, the only way to get to a life-saving treatment, a critical negotiation, or her son's graduation on time was to control the clock completely. One of the flight attendants, a woman in her early 30s with kind eyes and a nervous habit of twisting her wedding ring, finally gathered the courage to speak. "Ma'am," she said softly, hovering near the seat, "can I get you anything? Water? A blanket?" The woman looked up and smiled. "Tea would be nice. Chamomile if you have it, of course." The attendant hesitated, and, I just want to say again, I'm really sorry about what happened on the ground. We were given the wrong profile. We should have— It's okay, the woman interrupted gently. You didn't know. And honestly, I get it. You do? She nodded. People see a black woman in jeans with a backpack and a teenager, and they don't picture someone who owns a jet worth more than some small countries. It's not your fault you've been taught to expect certain things from certain people, the attendant swallowed, but you are that person. And so are a lot of others you'll never see at terminals like this, she said. Not because they can't afford it, but because they're tired of having to prove they belong every single time. That hit hard. The attendant thought about her own sister, a brilliant engineer who'd left the industry after years of being mistaken for administrative staff. She thought about her nephew, who loved robotics but was always the only kid who looked like him at summer camps. She brought the tea, set it down carefully, and this time didn't walk away immediately. "Can I ask, how did you get here?" she said, voice low. "Not the airport, I mean, all of this." The woman took a slow sip, then leaned back. "It started with a problem I lived every day. My son needed medicine once, special kind, had to be refrigerated. The delivery service said it would take 3 days, but he needed it in 24 hours. I called everyone. No one could guarantee it. So I drove 300 miles myself through a snowstorm just to get it to him." She paused, eyes distant for a moment. "That night I realized the system wasn't broken. It was just never built for people like us. So I decided to build one that was." The attendant listened, completely still. This wasn't a brag. It was a story, raw, real, and full of the kind of grit you don't see in glossy magazine profiles. Later, the captain came back to the cabin. He'd reviewed the ownership records himself. The jet was part of a larger aviation trust, yes, but the ultimate beneficial owner was clear. And the trust wasn't just holding assets. It funded STEM programs in underserved schools, supported women-led startups, and quietly covered medical transport for families who couldn't afford it. "You're not just flying for your sister, are you?" the captain asked. She shook her head. "Not just for her. But she's the reason I'm on this flight today." He nodded slowly. "We'll get you to Zurich as fast as safely possible." As the jet crossed into Canadian airspace, the son finally pulled out his earbuds. "Mom," he said, "remember when I asked why we couldn't just take a regular plane?" She smiled. "I do. You said because sometimes love needs its own runway." She reached over and squeezed his hand. Still true. Outside, the sky turned deeper blue. Clouds stretched like cotton below them. Inside, something had shifted. The crew wasn't just serving a client anymore. They were part of something bigger, a moment where assumptions cracked open and humanity stepped through. No one talked much after that. But the silence wasn't awkward. It was respectful. Even the way the attendants poured water or adjusted the cabin lights felt different, softer, more intentional. Hours passed. The woman dozed lightly, her notebook resting on her lap. Her son watched a movie but kept glancing at her, pride flickering in his eyes. The attendants worked quietly, but now they saw her not as an anomaly, but as proof that brilliance doesn't wear a uniform, that success doesn't always announce itself with noise, and that sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who never needed to shout. And as the jet banked slightly toward the Atlantic, heading east toward a city where hope waited in a hospital room, everyone on board carried a quiet understanding. They hadn't just witnessed ownership of a $2.1 billion jet. They'd witnessed the weight of a life built on purpose, and the grace of someone who owned everything, yet demanded nothing. The sun dipped lower outside the jet's windows, painting the clouds in soft oranges and purples as the aircraft sliced through the upper sky toward Europe. Inside, the cabin had settled into a quiet rhythm, the gentle hum of the engines, the occasional clink of a cup, the rustle of a blanket being adjusted. But beneath the calm, something deeper was unfolding. The woman sat with her hands folded in her lap, eyes closed, not sleeping, just resting. Her son watched her for a moment, then leaned over. "Do you think Auntie's waiting up?" he asked softly. She opened her eyes and smiled. "Knowing her? She's probably arguing with the nurses about hospital food again." He chuckled, but it faded quickly. "You really think this treatment will work?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "But it's the best chance she's got. And I'm not letting distance or red tape stand in the way." That was the truth no one had fully grasped back at the terminal. This wasn't a luxury trip. It wasn't a display of wealth or status. It was a race against time, fueled by love and the kind of fierce loyalty that runs deeper than blood. It's built over years of shared struggles, late-night phone calls, and promises kept when no one was watching. Her sister had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder that most doctors had never seen. Standard treatments failed. Clinical trials were full, but a specialized immunotherapy center in Zurich had developed a new protocol, personalized, precise, and only available to a handful of patients worldwide. Getting in required more than money. It required speed, coordination, and someone willing to move mountains. She'd moved them. The flight crew, now fully aware of the stakes, had shifted from professional courtesy to quiet reverence. One attendant, the same one who'd first questioned her at the ramp, sat nearby, folding napkins with extra care. She'd overheard the conversation and couldn't stop thinking about it. She had an aunt, too, someone who'd raised her when her parents couldn't. The thought of losing her, of not being able to reach her in time, it hit close. During a routine check-in, the captain came back to the cabin again. "We've been cleared for priority descent into Zurich," he said. "Air traffic's giving us a direct approach. We'll shave about 20 minutes off." "Thank you," the woman said, her voice thick with gratitude. "That means more than you know," he nodded. "Your sister's lucky to have you." "She's the one who taught me how to fight," she replied. "I'm just returning the favor." As dinner was served, light, warm meals prepared with care, the attendants made sure everything was just right. Not because they were afraid of making another mistake, but because they finally understood. This journey wasn't about the jet, the price tag, or even the destination. It was about showing up for someone you love when the world says it's too hard, too far, too expensive. Her son picked at his food, then looked up. "Remember when Auntie used to drive us to the science fair? Even when her car kept stalling?" She laughed softly. "And she'd pop the hood like she knew what she was doing, even though she didn't. But she always got it started again. Because she refused to let us miss out," she said. "She believed in us before we believed in ourselves." That was the thread running through everything, the quiet, relentless belief that people deserve better. That care matters. That showing up, even when it's inconvenient, even when no one's watching, is its own kind of power. Later, as the jet crossed over the Alps, the lights of Swiss towns began to twinkle below like scattered stars. The woman stood and walked to the galley, not to ask for anything, but to thank the crew personally. "You've been so kind," she said, "and I know this isn't your usual flight." One of the attendants, a man who'd barely spoken all trip, finally looked up. "Most of our passengers, they're loud, demanding. They treat this like a hotel in the sky. But you're just a person trying to help someone you love," she nodded. "That's all any of us really are, isn't it?" He didn't answer, but his eyes said everything. Back in her seat, she pulled out her phone. A message blinked on the screen, a photo from the Zurich hospital. Her sister, propped up in bed wearing a hospital gown but grinning, holding a sign that read, "Tell my stubborn sister to land already. I saved her favorite chocolate." She showed it to her son. He grinned. "She's gonna be okay." "We're gonna make sure of it," she said. As the jet began its descent, the cabin lights dimmed slightly. The attendants secured the galley, but their movements were slower now, more thoughtful. They weren't just finishing a job. They were witnessing something rare, realness in a world that often trades it for performance. When the wheels touched down at Zurich Airport, it was just after 7 a.m. local time. Rain misted the tarmac, soft and steady. Ground crew rushed to position the stairs. An ambulance with medical transport equipment waited nearby. Not because it was protocol, but because the woman had arranged it weeks ago, just in case. She stood, zipped her jacket, and turned to the crew. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." "No," the lead attendant said, stepping forward. "Thank you for reminding us why we do this." Her son slung his backpack over his shoulder. They walked down the steps together, not in a hurry, but with purpose. At the bottom, a hospital liaison greeted them with an umbrella and a warm smile. As they disappeared into the waiting vehicle, the crew stood on the jet's doorway, watching until the taillights vanished into the gray morning. Inside the plane, silence returned, but it wasn't empty. It was full of something new, a quiet understanding that wealth isn't measured in assets, but in what you're willing to do for the people you love. And sometimes the most powerful thing a person can own isn't a $2.1 billion jet. It's the courage to use it for someone else. The return flight from Zurich wasn't scheduled for another 2 days, but the crew didn't treat it like downtime. Back at the private terminal near the airport, they gathered in the crew lounge not to rest but to talk. What had happened on the outbound leg kept replaying in their minds, not as a mistake, but as a mirror. One of the younger attendants, the one who'd twisted her wedding ring, nerve stopped thinking about the woman's words. "People don't expect someone like me to own a jet." She'd said it without bitterness, almost gently like she was explaining gravity, but it landed like a stone in the chest. "I keep wondering," she said to the others over coffee, "how many times we've done that, judged someone before they even spoke." The captain, usually quiet and reserved, surprised them by speaking up. "I've been flying private for 15 years, seen billionaires, celebrities, politicians, but never once did I question if they belonged. Yet the moment a black woman walks up in jeans, we assume she's lost." No one argued. They couldn't. The truth sat heavy in the room. Meanwhile, at the hospital in Zurich, things were moving faster than anyone expected. The treatment had begun within hours of arrival. The medical team, impressed by how well prepared the woman was, her files organized, her questions precise, treated her not as a wealthy client, but as a partner in care. Her sister, though weak, was in good spirits. She joked with nurses, asked about their families, and insisted her sister eat something besides airport snacks. "She's always been like that," the woman told her son one evening, sitting by the hospital window as rain tapped softly against the glass. "Even when she was sick as a kid, she'd make sure I had the last cookie." He smiled. "Guess that's where you get it from." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe it's just what love looks like when it's real." Back on the jet, the crew used the layover to do something unusual. They drafted a proposal. Not for management, not for PR, but for themselves. A short, honest document outlining how unconscious bias had shaped their assumptions, and how they wanted to change. They included suggestions: better training, more diverse briefing materials, even a simple rule: never assume ownership based on appearance. They didn't know if it would go anywhere. But for the first time, they felt responsible, not just for service, but for respect. When the woman and her son returned to the jet 2 days later, they noticed the difference right away. The greeting wasn't stiff or overly polite. It was warm, human. The same attendant who'd stopped them at the ramp now met them with a quiet, "Welcome back. Your sister's doing better, I hope." "She is," the woman said, surprised. "How did you—" "We've been following the updates you shared with the ground team," the attendant admitted. "We've been rooting for her." That small gesture meant more than any 5-star review ever could. As the jet lifted off from Zurich, heading west this time, the mood inside was lighter, but deeper too. During the flight, the woman didn't stay in her seat. She walked through the cabin, not as an owner inspecting her property, but as someone connecting. She asked the attendants about their lives, where they were from, what they dreamed of, what kept them going on long flights. One shared that she was studying to become a nurse. "It's tough," she said, "working full-time and taking night classes." The woman listened, then said, "I started my company while working nights at a warehouse. I used to code during my lunch breaks with one hand and hold my sleeping son with the other." The attendant's eyes widened. "You never would have guessed." "No one ever does," she replied with a small smile. "But that's why it matters, to keep going even when no one sees you." Later, the son sat with the captain in the jump seat near the cockpit, asking questions about flight paths and navigation. The captain, usually all business, found himself opening up, talking about how he'd failed his first pilot exam, how his father didn't believe flying was a real job for someone from their neighborhood. "You ever feel like you have to be twice as good just to be seen as equal?" the boy asked. The captain looked at him, then nodded slowly. "Every single day." In that moment, the jet wasn't just a machine carrying people across oceans. It was a space where walls came down, where titles faded and stories rose to the surface. The $2.1 billion price tag meant nothing compared to the value of those conversations. As they crossed over the Atlantic again, the woman sat by the window, watching the endless blue stretch below. Her phone buzzed, a message from her sister. "Doctor says I'm responding well. Tell that stubborn niece of mine I'll be dancing at her graduation." She showed it to her son. He grinned. "She's really going to be okay?" "I think so," she said. "And maybe this trip helped more than just her." He looked at her, confused. She gestured subtly toward the crew. How they moved with more ease now, how they laughed a little more, how they looked people in the eye without hesitation. "They saw me," she said quietly. "Not the jet. Not the money, just me. And that changed something." He thought about that, then nodded. "Yeah, it changed me too." By the time they approached U.S. airspace, the crew had made a quiet decision. They wouldn't just file their proposal. They'd ask to present it in person, to leadership, to training coordinators, to anyone who'd listen. Not to shame anyone, but to build something better. Because if one flight could shift their perspective this much, imagine what a whole company could do. When the wheels touched down back at Teterboro, the sun was setting again, full circle. The woman and her son stepped off the jet, not with fanfare but with quiet satisfaction. The lead attendant walked them to the terminal door. "Thank you," she said, "for trusting us with your journey." The woman turned. "Thank you for seeing me." They hugged, brief, genuine, the kind that doesn't need words. As they walked away, the crew stood together on the tarmac, watching them go. The jet sat behind them, gleaming under the twilight sky. But none of them were thinking about its value anymore. They were thinking about the woman who owned it, not because she had billions, but because she carried something far rarer: grace under pressure, love without limits, and the quiet power of showing up exactly as you are. And in that moment, they all knew. They'd never look at a passenger the same way again. Weeks passed. The story of the jet, the certificate, and the quiet woman who owned it didn't explode online like a scandal. It spread like a whisper. Not through headlines, but through conversations. A flight attendant told a friend, who told a colleague, who mentioned it in a training session. Someone posted a vague but powerful thread on a professional forum: "Never assume, ever." It got thousands of likes, but no names were used. No photos, no drama. Just a lesson passed hand to hand like a secret worth keeping. Back home, life returned to its rhythm, but not exactly as it was before. The woman's sister was recovering well, stronger every day. She'd started physical therapy, teased her niece about wasting $1 billion jet on her, and promised to cook a proper meal once she was back on her feet. The son went back to school, but now walked a little taller, not because of the jet or the money, but because he'd seen his mother stand firm without raising her voice and win with dignity. The woman herself went back to work, but something had shifted. She'd always believed in action over attention, but now she saw a new kind of responsibility. It wasn't enough to build something powerful. You had to make sure others could step into that power too. So she quietly redirected part of her trust's annual giving, not to flashy galas or named buildings, but to something quieter. Scholarships for young people from overlooked communities who wanted to fly, not just as passengers, but as pilots, engineers, air traffic controllers, aviation technicians. She partnered with flight schools in cities where kids rarely saw someone who looked like them in a cockpit. The program didn't have a fancy name, just a simple mission: if you can see it, you can be it. Meanwhile, the crew from that flight didn't forget. Their proposal on bias awareness was accepted, not just approved, but adopted as a pilot program across the company's private aviation division. New hires now received training that included real scenarios, not just theory. Briefings no longer included assumptions about a client's appearance, just facts. And every quarter, a guest speaker came in. Sometimes a nurse, sometimes a teacher, sometimes a founder like the woman they'd met. People who'd been underestimated and rose anyway. One of the attendants from that flight even enrolled in a leadership course, inspired, she said, by watching someone lead without needing to command. Months later, the woman received a letter. Not an email, not a message, actual paper folded neatly, mailed to her office. It was from the lead flight attendant. Inside she wrote, "You didn't just fly your sister to treatment. You gave us permission to be better. Thank you for showing us that respect isn't earned by how you dress. It's given by how you see others." The woman read it twice, then tucked it into the same worn notebook where she'd first sketched her business idea all those years ago. She never gave interviews about the incident, never posted about the jet on social media. When a reporter called asking for a quote about owning a $2.1 billion aircraft, she politely declined. "The jet isn't the story," she said. "My sister is, and the people who helped us get to her." That was the thing no one expected. Her legacy wouldn't be measured in assets but in ripples. One afternoon, she visited a flight academy in Atlanta. She didn't announce herself, just walked in like any visitor. Inside, a classroom of teenagers, most of them black and brown, were learning navigation basics. One girl, maybe 16, looked up and froze. "Wait," she said, eyes wide. "You're her, aren't you?" "The one from the story?" The woman smiled. "What story is that?" The one about the mom who owned the jet but looked like she was just regular. And the crew didn't believe her until she showed the papers. She nodded slowly. Yeah, that was me. The whole room went quiet. Then one student asked, "Did it hurt?" When they didn't believe you. She thought for a moment. Not hurt. Just familiar? But what mattered was what happened after. They listened. They changed. And that's what I hope you all remember. People can grow. Systems can change. And you don't have to wait for permission to belong. Later, as she left, the instructor pulled her aside. Those kids talked about you for weeks after. Said if she can do it, so can we. She just nodded. That's the point. Back at her office, she reviewed the latest numbers from her company. Not profits, but impact. How many small businesses had shipped their first international order using her platform? How many single parents had gotten stable jobs through her workforce program? How many students had received full rides to aviation school? The jet sat in its hangar, ready for the next mission. Maybe it would carry her to a board meeting. Maybe to visit her sister again. Maybe to surprise her son at college graduation. It didn't matter. The machine was just a tool. The real power had always been in the hands of the person using it. Not to show off, but to show up. And that's how the story truly ended. Not with a grand finale, but with quiet continuation. No viral fame. No dramatic showdown. Just a woman who owned a $2.1 billion jet and chose to use it like any loving sister, any devoted mother, any ordinary person would to help someone she cared about. But in doing so, she reminded everyone who witnessed it that brilliance doesn't wear a uniform, success doesn't announce itself with noise, and dignity doesn't need proof. It just needs space to be seen. Years from now, when those flight students become captains, when those scholarship recipients design the next generation of aircraft, when crews greet every passenger with open eyes and open hearts, they'll carry that lesson forward. Not because of a certificate or a price tag, but because of a moment at a quiet terminal, when a woman in jeans walked up to her own jet and changed everything just by being herself. It had been over a year since that morning at Teterboro, the day a quiet woman in jeans walked up to a $2.1 billion jet and turned a routine flight into something far bigger than aviation. Most people would have moved on, forgotten, filed it away as a strange anecdote. But for those who were there, the moment never really left. It settled into their bones like a truth they hadn't known they needed to hear. Now, on a cool spring afternoon, the same private terminal hummed with its usual hushed energy. But something felt different. Not louder, not flashier, just warmer. A new flight attendant, fresh out of training, stood near the ramp, double-checking her clipboard. She wasn't nervous about the aircraft or the route. She was thinking about the lesson she'd learned in orientation. Never assume. Always verify with respect. Her instructor had told the story without naming names. There was a woman, she'd said, who owned the jet but didn't look like what they expected. And instead of getting angry, she showed them the truth and gave them a chance to do better. That story had stuck. Not because of the money, but because of the grace. Inside the terminal lounge, a small group of teenagers sat together laughing over snacks. They wore matching navy windbreakers with a simple patch on the sleeve. Future Aviators Initiative. These were the first cohort of scholarship recipients from the program, quietly funded by the woman who'd once been mistaken for an imposter on her own plane. Most had never set foot in a private terminal before. Now they were here for a tour and a surprise. A few feet away, leaning against a glass wall with a coffee in hand, stood the woman herself. She hadn't planned to come, but when she heard the students would be visiting, she changed her schedule. Not to speak, not to be honored, just to watch. To see if the ripples she'd hoped for were really spreading. One of the teens, a girl with braids and sharp eyes, spotted her first. She nudged her friend. "Is that?" The woman gave a small, almost shy wave. No fanfare, no entourage. Just a nod like she was greeting a neighbor. The group fell silent for a second, then erupted in quiet excitement. They didn't swarm her. They'd been taught professionalism, but their eyes said everything. She's real. She's here. Later, during the hangar tour, the lead instructor paused beside the very Gulfstream G700 from that day. It had been maintained impeccably, but it looked the same. Sleek, silver, unassuming in its power. "This aircraft," the instructor said, "is more than metal and engines. It's a reminder. A reminder that who you are isn't defined by what you wear, how you speak, or what people expect. It's defined by what you do. One of the boys raised his hand. Did she ever fly it again? The instructor smiled. All the time, but never just for herself. Back in the lounge, the woman sat with the flight crew who'd been on that original trip. They'd kept in touch, not often, but meaningfully. Birthdays, holidays, a quick text when one of them passed a certification exam. Today, they'd gathered not for a reunion, but for a quiet milestone. The bias awareness program they'd helped create was now mandatory across 3 major private aviation firms. You started something, the captain said, stirring his coffee. Not on purpose, but you did, she shook her head. You all chose to listen. That's what mattered. He looked at her. Most people would have walked away angry, called lawyers, gone public. But you gave us room to grow. That's how change happens, she said simply, not by shaming, but by showing another way. As the afternoon light slanted through the windows, the students returned from their tour. They gathered in a loose circle, and one of them, the girl with the braids, stepped forward. Can I ask you something? She said, of course, after everything. Do you still get doubted? Even now? The woman didn't flinch. Sometimes. Not as much, but it still happens. At conferences, in meetings, even at school pickups, people see a black woman and make a story in their head before I say a word. So what do? I keep showing up, she said. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove to myself and to kids like you that your place isn't given to you. It's claimed quietly, consistently, with work, not noise. The girl nodded slowly. Then with a grin, she added, also maybe carry the ownership papers just in case. Laughter rippled through the group. Even the woman chuckled. I keep a digital copy now. Saves space in the backpack. Later, as the students prepared to leave, the woman handed each of them a small envelope. No logos, no fanfare. Inside was a handwritten note and a gift card for flight simulator time at a local academy. On the back of each note, the same line. The sky doesn't care what you look like. It only asks if you're ready to rise. Driving home that evening, she thought about her sister. Fully recovered now, back to her old self. Cooking too much food, giving unsolicited advice, and recently, volunteering at a community center that helped single parents navigate healthcare. She'd told her niece, you flew me to life. Now I'm going to help others find theirs. It was that kind of chain reaction that no balance sheet could capture. That night, her son called from college. He was studying engineering now with a minor in ethics. Professor used your story in class today, he said. Not your name. Just a founder who owned a jet but was treated like she didn't belong. He asked us, what systems make that possible? And how do we dismantle them? She smiled. And what did you say? I said the first step is seeing people. Not roles, not stereotypes, just people. Good answer, she said softly. Weeks later, a short documentary aired on a public broadcasting channel. No dramatic music. No reenactments. Just interviews with aviation workers, students, and a few quiet shots of runways at dawn. The woman wasn't in it, but her impact was. One flight attendant said, before that day I thought professionalism meant perfection. Now I know it means humility. The documentary didn't go viral. It didn't need to. It reached the people who needed to hear it, instructors, hiring managers, young dreamers scrolling late at night, wondering if there was space for them in the sky. And then, one ordinary Tuesday, something small but significant happened. At a regional airport in Ohio, a young black pilot taxied her first commercial flight to the gate. As she shut down the engines, her co-pilot, a veteran in his 50s, turned to her and said, you belong here. Don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise, she smiled. My flight instructor told me a story once, about a woman who owned a jet, but had to prove it just aboard. Said it changed how she saw the whole industry. He nodded. I heard that story too. It was everywhere now, not as gossip but as guidance. Back at home, the woman sat on her porch watching the sunset. Her phone buzzed. A message from the flight school. One of your scholarship students just soloed. She asked us to send you this. Attached was a photo, a young woman in a headset grinning beside a small Cessna, the wind tugging at her jacket. On the plane's door, someone had written in chalk, for the woman who showed us the runway. She didn't post it, didn't share it, just saved it to a foe.